Welcome to the Liberty Beacon Rant, and I am your host, Roger Landry, and of course I'm joined every week by the lovely and highly intelligent and very patient Paula Mathers. How are you today, Paula? I understand you've had a big day.
Oh man, we had a big day. Awake Radio, These Changing Times Radio, Shaziz.com, 1800.weebly.com radio, Community Press Group. Everybody was out, and it was our very first TV live airing, live viewing of Awake hosts, and it was just so exciting. We started out a little bumpy, a lot of buffering, and then the flow started, and it was amazing. We're all learning this new process, and I think they're having trouble with my mic, so I'm going to turn this back over to you.
You sound great. You sound great to me. Anyway, that would be something I would consider, except as I was telling you, I don't know if our audience is prepared to see me look as angry as I sound. You see this crazy old man waving his hands and drooling at the mouth and his eyeballs ready to pop out of his head. I don't know, but that might be good too. It might add a little bit even more credibility to what I'm saying when they realize that I'm actually as angry as I sound.
Yeah,
There wouldn't be any doubt.
It's kind of, it's not easy, because when I went to radio first, and I know I'm not trying to take up all your time.
Oh, don't worry about it. I've
It
got
was really
plenty.
hard for me to even get to talk on the chat line. I watched other people's chats for I don't know how long, and was kind of afraid to share and all that. So the fact that now there was a camera on me today doing it was, oh my god, was just different. And we kind of goofed at each other and laughed at each other and just had a wonderful time.
Well, that's good. And I'm very, very glad that you've broken into that venue. And again, like, this is something we'll talk about in the future because the Liberty Beacon Project does have a few shows on Awake Radio, which we're very proud to have there. And I think I could convince some of these people that they're actually attractive enough to be on television.
You think we could convince them?
Yes. Well,
I don't know. It's been hard to convince all of us.
I can sell ice cream to the Eskimos, or ice cubes to the Eskimos. So let me talk to them, and we'll see what we can do. But you, Steve, and I will have a conversation going forward. Right now, I'm going to bust into a rant.
Go for it.
All right. Well, last week, if you remember, I talked very prolifically about the horrors of a nuclear war. Excuse me, and of course, the throat coughs always come in because my voice gets very agitated when I rant, but I can't help myself. Again, this is not an act. I cannot put an act up like this. As a matter of fact, I would be the world's best actor if I could. But I just got done doing a bit of a rant with someone else, and now I'm breaking right into this, and I've been looking forward to this because this is a topic that is very near and dear to me. It is a topic that needs to be discussed and is being discussed nowhere. As I mentioned last week, we have an entire generation today that has grown up who doesn't have a clue what it's like to live under the threat of nuclear annihilation every day of your life. I am 3 generations old exactly on August 19th. I'm coming up on 3 generations of age. I was born August 19th, 1954, and we're coming up soon on August 19th of 2014. So anybody that can do the math realizes that's 60 years. That's 3 generations. And for all but the last generation, for the first 2 generations of my life, we lived under the threat of total annihilation. As a matter of fact, we had a term for it. It was called mutually assured destruction. You launch at me, whether I launch back or not, we're all dead. I launch at you, whether or not you launch back or not, we're all dead. Because in order to pepper a country the size of what the Soviet Union was, and Russia is still huge, but with the Soviet Union, a lot of the satellite states that have broken away since the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was an even larger country, or union. And in order to pelt that entire landmass, to prevent, because we didn't have anti-ballistic missiles back then. So you had to take out their first strike capability, or you had to take out their retaliatory capability, okay? Which meant they have hundreds, if not thousands, of missile silos. And a lot of those missiles are capable of carrying MIRVs, okay? Or multiple independent reentry vehicles. Now, I'm telling you that, you know, if you've got 5,000 missiles, and each one has the ability to say, and I worked within this industry, and I worked for the DOD, and I'm an ex-nuclear submarine sailor, and I rode on the submarines that carried 16 of these batteries. 16 missiles capable of reaching halfway around the world, all with multiple warheads. One submarine. We have many of them. The Russians have many of them. The Chinese have them. Actually, the Israelis have them. Actually, they have them in Great Britain. Actually, they have them in France. And this is just the submarines. These are not the silos that are scattered all across these nations. The United States is a big landmass. China's a big landmass. India, which is a nuclear power, is a big landmass. The Soviet Union is a big landmass. And nobody's going to feel that they're going to be stupid enough to take all of these missiles and put them in a nice little bunch, a little group, so one big, say, I don't know, 20 or 30 megaton hydrogen bomb can take them all out in one pop. No. They're scattered across the entire landmass of these nations. So back when I was young, back when there was a quote-unquote nuclear threat of mutually assured destruction or the annihilation of humanity, if any one of these nations decided to launch an attack, in order to decapitate an enemy nation, you had to launch hundreds of missiles with multiple reentry vehicles. I also told you last week that scientific peer-reviewed studies. Now you've got to remember, when you live under the danger of mutually assured destruction for generations, it gives many people the chance to do research on the inevitability or the outcome of this mechanism. And the research was done. And the research was proven. And that research states unequivocally that it only takes 1% of any one of the three biggest nations, as far as nuclear powers go, 1% of their, not combined, 1% of each individual nation to create enough havoc on the biosphere to kill off about 30% of humanity very quickly and to poison the biosphere and the rest of humanity slowly over time. Now imagine 5 or 10%. Imagine trying to decapitate a country like Russia, or a union like the Soviet Union, or a country like China. Imagine trying to take out all of their missiles. Because if a few sneak through, they're going to wreak, I don't know, damage that we may never recover from. If only 4 or 5 of their missiles come through. Because if each one of them has multiple reentry vehicles, and let's just throw a fictitious number and say there's 5 of them on each one of these missiles, and they get 5 or 6 missiles through, we've got 30 high-yield nuclear warheads raining down on the United States. One hits Chicago, one hits Los Angeles, one hits Detroit, one hits New York, one hits Atlanta. I've only counted off 5. So we couldn't even afford to let 5 or 6 of their missiles sneak through. So we would have had to have launched a first strike of hundreds of missiles. That's well above the 1% that these scientists can prove unequivocally would have been an immediate lights out for about 30% of humanity, and the rest of us, well, it's just a matter of time. 1%. But in order to take out their first strike capability, we would have had to have launched, what, 25%, 30%? You're talking about a nuclear winter. We would kick up enough radioactive dust into the upper atmosphere that it would be 10 years before all of it cleared, a full decade, and 3 years before any sunlight got through at all. What does that do to every plant living on this planet? And what most people don't realize is that the majority of our oxygen doesn't come from plants. It doesn't. It comes from microorganisms in the ocean. And they depend on the sunlight to live. That's what they live off of. You take the sunlight away, they die off. All of these microorganisms die off. The oxygen supply is depleted by 60-70%. Not only that, there's no sunlight. Plants exist through photosynthesis. They require sunlight to thrive. You block the sunlight for 1 year, never mind 10 years, and everything that's growing, everything that's green is gone. So when the amoebas or these microorganisms in the ocean go away and the green plants go away, where the hell do you think humanity goes? Where do you think it goes? What are we going to eat? Well, Charlton Heston gave us a hint on that a while back. I really enjoyed the movie. Ever watched the movie with Soylent Green? Because that's going to be about all there is to eat, my friends. Is the flesh of human beings who have died. And maybe some that they would force to die. Because if you don't think that if there's nothing to eat, clans and groups and nations and families and local neighborhoods that band together aren't going to be going after you for anything you might have, and if you don't have anything to eat, if you think cannibalism is out of the question, you're wrong. It has been proven over and over again throughout history that mankind will resort to cannibalism if there is no other mechanism left for survival. This is a fact. Do some research on that. I'm not trying to scare you. Well, hell, I am trying to scare you. But I'm trying to scare you with fact, not fiction. And when everything that we eat is gone, what does that leave? We're talking about 10 years of no sunlight. And with a very limited strike of 1%, 3 years of no sunlight. It only takes 1 year to kill everything off. And sure, some stuff might come back after a year because seeds can lay dormant in the ground. But after 3 years, forget it. After 10 years, impossible. The planet's gone. This is the threat we, my generation, lived under for 2 full generations, 40 years, because it's been about a generation, about 20 years since the Soviet Union fell apart and the nuclear clock was backed off and we stopped thinking about nuclear warfare every single day. And that, my friends, is a mistake. That's the whole reason for this. Now, we're going to finish up on this today because I'm not going to beat it to death. What I wanted to do was bring it to everybody's attention because the mere fact that we've all forgot about it is what brings it forward into these elitist minds as a possibility to be utilized. Because there's nobody pushing back against it now. Because there's nobody out there who thinks that it's a reality anymore. I'm telling you it is. And I'm telling you there are those arrogant enough to believe that they can utilize that mechanism today and get away with it. And I'm telling you that from somebody who spent 40 years, the first 40 years of his life, wondering if the end of the world was going to come today. I served on nuclear submarines which carried nuclear warheaded missiles. If you don't think I didn't worry about that every day, and I was pretty safe. I was underneath the ocean in a submarine. And I can't tell you how deep they are or where they go, but I can tell you that it's going to be pretty darn hard to knock out the entire submarine fleet unless you pepper the entire ocean with the biggest, baddest nuclear bombs mankind has ever built. So they're going to survive. But what would I have survived to come back to? Because all of the landmass would have been poisoned with nuclear fallout. What hadn't suffered the destruction of a strike? A nuclear strike would have suffered the destruction of massive blasts, massive fires, and massive nuclear fallout for generations to come. We discussed all this last week. I told you about the different mechanisms of destruction that are related to nuclear weapons. I told you that there are 4 types of scenarios. The first one would be a ground blast. And a ground blast is probably the least destructive, unless you're in ground zero. If you're on ground zero, it means you're instantly vaporized. But these are omnidirectional explosions. There is no way, like with conventional explosives, to shape the charge so it all goes in one direction. There is no way to do that. So it's just too powerful. And anything that initial blast touches is the atoms, the molecular structure is torn apart. And it becomes part of the explosion, which releases massive amounts of energy. So you can't shape a nuclear explosion. You can't do it. So a ground explosion is the least devastating simply because a good portion, almost 50% of that blast, is going to go downward into the ground and be absorbed. It's going to dig a huge crater, and it's going to kick megatons of dust up into the upper atmosphere. That's where we get our nuclear winter from. That of the 50% that's left, a good portion of it, probably about 20 to 25% of it, is going to be the outward blast at ground level. That's going to race across the ground. Now, how does this blast occur and how does it destroy? When you have such a powerful explosion that happens within a millionth of a second, it starts to expand at a rate of speed that'll just bend your mind. Hundreds of kilometers per microsecond. And as it does this, it crashes into the atoms in the air. And it forces them outward, and they crash into other atoms and other molecules, and it forms a ripple effect, like dropping a pebble into a pond. You see the ripples expand out. Well, that's exactly what happens with this blast. You have the physical smashing of one atom into the next, or molecule into the next, into the next, into the next. And it's being done at such a high rate of speed that it forms a solid wall of destruction. Any of you out there who are 25 years old or younger might not have seen the videos we saw in school, where 5 miles, 10 miles from the blast, when the shock wave hits, it literally blew buildings into toothpicks. And immediately following the destruction of the blast wave came the thermal blast wave, which rose those buildings to temperatures above the flash point of the wood and even the metal almost instantaneously, and they went up like when you strike a match. Watch a match next time you strike it. Watch it explode into a brilliant flame, and then it settles out into a semi-passive flame which flickers, almost in a friendly fashion. But when that match head is initially struck, when the chemical explosion, and that's what a match is, it's a chemical explosion, occurs, it's very bright, it's uncontrolled, and it flares out in all directions. It's so small, though, that it really can't do any damage, and there's no real shock wave. Well, imagine a match head times a billion as far as the power goes that it's putting out. And you're going to come close to the smallest nuclear warhead ever detonated. The smallest. We're talking a few kilotons. Mankind has devised nuclear warheads that can go up to a theoretical, I believe the biggest one ever talked about or the biggest one ever researched. And I don't know if it was ever, I know 100 megaton bombs were built, but I believe 150 megaton bombs were also built, and I believe the biggest one that was conceived, and again, I'm not sure if it was ever built, was a 200 megaton bomb. Let's put this into perspective. A stick of TNT has about the explosive power of maybe 1 million match heads. A 200 megaton bomb has the explosive power of 200 million tons of TNT. We're talking about a thermonuclear bomb, a hydrogen bomb, because our first bombs were atomic bombs. Our next generation of bombs were hydrogen bombs, which basically split the hydrogen atom. And hydrogen releases a lot of energy when it's smashed into at that rate of speed with that much force. So now we're talking about an explosion that could wipe out an area bigger than the state of Connecticut, bigger than the state of New Jersey, bigger than the state, probably about the size of the state of either North or South Carolina or West Virginia or Virginia. Absolutely wipe it out, totally flatten it. Nothing would be left that you could recognize. Nothing. And then the blast radius would continue out for another 3, 4, 5, 600 miles. And then the thermal blast would continue out well beyond that point. Which everything within that thermal radius was cinders. Now imagine a half a dozen of those, or like I said, maybe 1% of the old Soviet Union's strike capability, if it got through. 1%. Maybe 10 missiles with 5 warheads each, 50 of those raining down across the United States. Each one targeting the 50 highest density populations in this country. We're talking about the total destruction of civilization in just about all of North America. And we're talking about nuclear winter and nuclear fallout that will destroy all of humanity eventually. Now, again, I'm going over this entire mechanism for a very good reason, okay? The reason is it has left our consciousness. The reason is that we have, again, an entire generation who hasn't got a clue. They never went through a duck and cover drill. I can tell you that if a nuclear bomb goes off in New York City, those kids hiding under that wood and tin desk in their flimsy schoolhouse isn't going to do squat to keep them alive. Nothing. So the government wasn't trying to tell us that we were all going to survive a nuclear strike. What they were trying to do was alleviate some of the massive social depression that we all had as an entire society at the peak of this Cold War. Imagine an entire nation constantly being told we're on the brink of total disaster to humanity. Anybody my age remembers watching the news and hearing at least a couple of times a month that the scientists and the politicians had moved the hands of the nuclear clock up, closer to total destruction. Midnight was, that's it, we're launching. There were times when we were 2 minutes from midnight on that imaginary clock. We had a psyche, all of us, of the world's could more than likely, I could go to bed and not wake up tomorrow because the world's gone. So they had to give us a mechanism of release. They had to give us something that would give us even the tiniest little bit of relief that we could survive something this evil. So they went to all of the schools and instituted the duck and cover program, where all of us children, and they used to hold drills, when the principal would ring the alarm bell that was heard in every classroom, and the teachers would tell us all to get under our desk, crouch down, and put our hands over the back of our heads. I'm going to tell you one more time what that would have accomplished. Nothing! Nothing. But they had to do something. The government couldn't be seen to be doing nothing. So they did build massive shelters. They're called subways. The basements of large municipal buildings were designated as shelters. And certain municipalities around the country held drills, fallout drills, where everybody went to fallout shelters. The same way they did for the bombing raids in the United Kingdom, in England during World War II. When the entire populations of these large cities like London, when that siren went off, they all ran to these bomb shelters. But I'm going to tell you, a shallow shelter like that ain't going to do you no good. And what were you going to come out of that hole even if you did survive? What were you going to come out to? We remember seeing the films of Hiroshima and Nagasaki after the bombs were dropped. We remember seeing the devastation of hundreds of thousands of people and square miles of land that was absolutely, it looked like somebody sprayed some foam on it and took a Bic razor to it. And these were 15, 20 kiloton bombs. Not megatons, not hundreds of megatons, 15 to 20 kilotons, 15 to 20,000 tons, not 200 million tons. And if we saw the total ruination of Nagasaki and Hiroshima with 20,000 tons of TNT, who the heck is going to survive in New York City in a shallow basement with a 1 megaton or a 50 megaton or a 100 megaton bomb falling on that city? Nobody! And nobody well out into the country surrounding it either. And nobody 500 to 1,000 miles away after the radiation spread. But we lived in a nation where they had to do something. And they did. They tried their best. And then it all went away. We had Glasnost. We had Reagan standing at the wall going, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And we saw the fall of the Iron Curtain. And we all stepped back, including myself. There were 2 decades where it didn't enter my mind. It didn't. And then I saw an article that basically was based on some information that was gleaned from the U.S. government. And if you go to the article that Paula has given you, Nuclear War, the option is still on the table. What the first part is my rant from last week and a little bit from the week before, and I'll touch on that real quick, and then we'll get into the second part of this article. Okay? Well, actually, I won't, because I just ranted all about that to you guys just now. And basically, it states everything that we've said, okay? The Cold War, when the Cold War ended, everybody let their guard down. 1% is all it's going to take for lights out for the majority of humanity. All of that stated in my rant in the first part of this article. The second part of the article is an attachment on something I found that absolutely riled me up about this. And I did a little bit more research, but this was the one article I wanted to present to you because it is, a lot of what's said here is stated in other articles. But all you have to do is a little research on this one and you will find a lot more information. This article was called "The Lethality of Nuclear Weapons." Okay? Nuclear wars have no winners. Beginning in 2006, Several of the world's leading climatologists at Rutgers, UCLA, Johns Hopkins University, and the University of Colorado Boulder published a series of studies that evaluated the long-term environmental consequences of a nuclear war, including baseline scenarios fought with merely 1% of the explosive power of the U.S. and or Russian launch-ready nuclear arsenals. That's what I explained to you. They concluded that the consequences of even a small nuclear war would include catastrophic disruptions of the global climates and massive destruction of the Earth's protective ozone layer. Let's stop right there. Does anybody understand what the ozone layer does for us? Do you remember about 10 years ago when everybody was screaming the ozone layer is going away because of all the CFRs and all of this, all of these spray cans we're using that have this magic formula in there that's coming out and it's eating away at the ozone layer, and the ozone layer around Antarctica, there's a big old hole in it. Well, why do we have to worry about that? Why do we have to worry about ozone? This is something that exists way up in the upper levels of our atmosphere. Why do we have to worry about that? The sun is a big ball of radiation. When an astronaut goes into space, he has to wear a shielded spacesuit. The International Space Station is heavily shielded. Radiation is particles that speed along at such high speeds they can shoot holes through normal steel, like bullets going through soft butter. That's what radiation is. It's neutrons and protons traveling at such a high rate of speed that they blast right through anything. And when enough of them blast through your body and perforate the cell walls, let's face it, eventually you turn into a piece of Swiss cheese and you die. The ozone layer is the planet's shield against this radioactivity being bombarded onto the surface of this planet on a daily basis. It never stops. At some point on this planet, the sun is always up. And if you can see the sun, deadly radiation is slamming down on this planet at an untold quantity constantly. There's never a let up. And the only thing keeping us all from frying instantly is the ozone layer. There's a little bit more to it than that, but I'm not going to have you all become experts on the Van Allen belts or the radiation belts that surround this planet. Let's suffice it to say that the reason that you and I don't die from solar radiation exposure within a couple of minutes after walking outside is because we have an ozone layer. Now let's go back to what I just said, okay? They concluded that the consequences of even a small nuclear war, 1% of either our arsenal or the Russian arsenal, would include catastrophic disruptions of the global climate and massive destruction of the Earth's protective ozone. There are more recent studies that global agriculture would also be negatively affected by such a war. A global famine would result that would cause up to 2 billion people to starve to death almost immediately. Well, there's a little over 7 billion of us. And if 2 billion of us, and I would dare to say, if we took everything into account, it would be closer to 3 billion. They only took certain criteria into account. But even so, we're talking about close to 30% of the planet's population dying. We're talking about a massive amount of the planet's ability to generate sustainable food going away almost immediately. And we're talking about a massive destruction of a majority of the ozone layer, which would mean cancer rates on this planet if you didn't go outside fully clothed in heavy, heavy clothing with no skin exposed anywhere, including your eyeballs, and covered in salve from head to toe to take up the slack your clothes didn't, you would die of cancer in a very short order. Telling me that cancer rates on this planet would increase by 1,000,000-fold almost instantly. These are peer-reviewed studies, my friends. These aren't guesses. They're not guesses. And they're not whims. And they're not somebody like me saying, I think this is what's going to happen. They're peer-reviewed studies, which are analyzed by the best scientists in the world and found to be without error. And they also predict that a war fought with less than half of the U.S. or the Russian strategic nuclear weapons would destroy the human race. In other words, U.S.-Russian nuclear war would create such an extreme long-term damage to the global environment that it would leave the earth uninhabitable for humans and for most animal forms of life for thousands of years. All of this I've been telling you. Now I'm giving it to you straight from the scientists, okay? You know that every time I do a rant, I base it on information I've done the research on. I provide you links on everything I talk about. And I don't just do it to cover my butt. I do it so that when you listen to the old man scream, you know there's credibility here. You know I'm angry and screaming for a reason. It's not theatrics. This stuff is making me angry. And for good reason. A recent article in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist, Self-Assured Destruction. The climate impacts of nuclear war begins by stating this. A nuclear war between Russia and the United States, even after the arsenal reductions planned under the New START program, would produce a nuclear winter. Hence, an attack by either side would be suicidal, resulting in self-assured destruction. Mad! Something I am right now. Mutually assured destruction. In 2009, the gentleman who wrote this article also wrote for the International Commission on Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. It summarizes the findings of these studies. It explains that nuclear firestorms would produce millions of tons of smoke. Millions of tons of smoke. Well, I got to tell you something. Smoke don't weigh very much. So when you got a ton of smoke, can you imagine how much smoke that is? Enough to fill the volume of a state the size of Rhode Island? Or a state the size of New Hampshire? That's 1 ton of smoke. 1 ton. He's stating here millions of tons of smoke, which would rise above the cloud level and form a global stratospheric smoke layer that would rapidly encircle the Earth. The smoke layer would remain for at least a decade. I told you that, 10 years. But this is coming from a scientist. And it would act to destroy the protective ozone layer, vastly increasing the UVB reaching the planet, as well as block warming sunlight, thus creating an ice age weather conditions that would last even 10 years or longer. So everything I've told you, I'm going to peer-reviewed studies. And everybody has access to this link. So everything I told you, none of it's fancy. None of it's made up. And it ought to be scaring the crap out of you. Because there's people out there who think they can get away with this today. And we'll get into that. We will. Paula, if I can get through this quick enough. Okay.
I know. It's a lot of information we don't realize, when we're
It
talking about it, how much time it actually takes.
it does. And especially since we're doing something that I feel absolutely needs to be done. We're taking something that has been hidden from the population of this country's psyche. We're taking something that doesn't exist in our mindset anymore. And we're bringing it back, or trying to bring it back to the front, or to be a part of our mindset. Because if we don't push back against this, we know how arrogant these people are. We know it. And as I said last week, all we have to do to prove this is, right now, the most destructive mechanism being used against mankind is not warfare. It's not. It's not GMOs. It's not vaccines. It's not drugs. Or Big Pharma's legal drugs. The most evil mechanism being utilized against mankind today is geoengineering, for which we have scientists across the planet screaming at the top of their lungs, Google it! The geoengineering has the ability to bring extinction to this planet quicker than any other scenario short of a full-blown nuclear war. And that we're well on our way to doing it. We talked about the aluminum being sprayed down across the planet, and the fact that nothing that lives on this planet tolerates aluminum. Whether it's plants, the crops they plant for us to eat, the plankton in the ocean that provide our oxygen, anything. You and me. Aluminum is so poisoning to you and me, you have no concept unless you do some research. I have. So we have global engineering going on not just over the United States, although we are the most globally engineered, us and Canada, spot on the globe. But the entire globe is being sprayed on a daily basis. Monsanto goes out and spends millions of dollars developing aluminum-resistant seeds. Seeds that will grow in aluminum-impregnated or saturated soil. That doesn't exist naturally on this planet. Aluminum is one of the most, I don't know, it's everywhere. Aluminum is in everything. But it's such small levels that it doesn't bother anything. Producing aluminum means you need a lot of dirt to suck enough aluminum out of it to make it worthwhile. Tons of dirt for a little bit of aluminum, and the byproduct of that, by the way, is fluoride. Yeah. Which is sold to our municipalities, and they put it in our water, and when you suck up this aluminum that's coming down in the air, or eating the GMOs that have sucked it up through their roots, because they can grow. Nothing else on the planet can, but they can grow in aluminum-saturated soil because they've been genetically engineered to do that. So once you've eaten all this aluminum, you got this great thing in your head, and some of you have heard me tell you this before. It's called the blood-brain barrier. And it says, whoa, aluminum, you ain't getting into the brain. You ain't getting into the brain. We ain't going to let you. We've developed this barrier here, and we're going to stop you. I just got done telling you that the manufacture of aluminum, one of the byproducts is fluoride. So when you drink a glass of fluoridated water after getting your vaccine, or eating your GMOs that are saturated with aluminum, or breathing the air after you've been chemtrailed, and you drink your glass of fluoridated water, fluoride facilitates the movement of that aluminum across the blood-brain barrier into your brain, where it immediately starts to slaughter brain cells. Ever wonder why you can't get the fluoride out of your municipal water no matter how hard you try? No matter how many of you rail against it? No matter how many times you march up and down the street saying take the fluoride out, they don't do it? The same reason why they tell you the chemtrails don't exist. Same reason why they tell you that aluminum in vaccines is good for you. Same reason why Monsanto spends tens of millions of dollars to genetically engineer plants that will grow in soil impregnated with one of the most toxic substances on this planet to humanity. You're getting it from all sides, but we're talking about nuclear war here. I'm telling you, if they are willing to perpetrate geoengineering on a global scale, which hundreds, if not thousands of scientists are screaming can send us all to extinction very quickly if we don't stop it and totally destroy the biosphere, if they're willing to do that, the only thing they could do that would make it happen quicker is to launch a nuclear war. Now, they're already poisoning the biosphere, fact, with geoengineering. We already know that it's sterilizing the biosphere and humanity, fact. So if they'll do that, tell me, convince me that they're not in their arrogance going to believe that they can pop a few nukes over here to bring this country that's fighting against the petrodollar and knock it to its knees, and that it ain't going to hurt nobody. Because if they honestly believed that it would hurt somebody, you wouldn't have GMOs. You wouldn't have aluminum and mercury in your vaccines. You wouldn't have geoengineering. But we do. So don't even try to convince me that they won't ever, in their arrogance, decide they can get away with popping a few nukes on a bad boy. Because if you think that, you're an idiot. And I won't apologize for that because I truly mean it. You're an idiot. You're a propagandized, half-brain dead idiot who sucked too much aluminum out of the air, had too many vaccines, and eaten too many GMOs. You want to talk about the dumbing down of humanity? We have aluminum poisoning in everything around us. Everything. And why do they use aluminum? It is one of the most prolific metals on this planet, and it is extremely poisonous to the human brain and nervous system. So they got plenty of it, and it does its job even in minute quantities. And it's in your food, it's in your water, it's in your air, it's in your medicine. Is this all a mistake? Can you convince me that the exact same mechanism of poison is in everything you put in your body? Everything. And it's a mistake? Even an idiot can't be that stupid. Everything you put in your body, and a lot of the stuff you put on your body, like makeup, like skin softener, either contains thimerosal, which is mercury, and that's even more toxic than aluminum, or it contains aluminum. So everything you put on or in your body contains that one highly toxic substance. But gee, that's all a coincidence, right? There can't be any connection. How can there not be a connection? Following a Russian nuclear war, temperatures in the central U.S. and Eurasia would fall below freezing every day for 1 to 3 years consistent. The intense cold would completely eliminate growing seasons for a decade or longer. No crops could be grown, leading to a famine that would kill most humans and a very large percentage of the animal population. Again, we discussed that. Let's go on to something else we talked last week. And again, I gave you my opinions last week, but opinions are like, farts. Everybody has one and they all smell. So now, this week, I'm backing it up with peer-reviewed science. I want that credibility factor in there. I don't care if you like me or not. But you're going to listen to me because you know I'm credible. And that means everything to me. And it means everything to Paula because her name is on this show. And how long do you think Paula would be my co-host or Awake Radio would sponsor this show if everybody drilled holes in everything I said and could prove that I was nothing but a shock jock? I wouldn't have lasted 62 weeks, and that's how long we've been doing this show now. And Paula, do I not challenge every single week anybody to poke a hole in what I'm saying?
Every single show.
So let's continue, okay? Electromagnetic pulse from high-altitude nuclear detonations would destroy the integrated circuits in all modern electronic devices, including those in commercial nuclear power plants. One of the things I ranted on last week was, how arrogant could you possibly be to feel that you could put out a limited nuclear strike? By limited, what you would have to do is you would have to immediately destroy a country's capability of retaliation. You'd have to do that. Okay? Now, in a country the size of Russia, and remember, they still control a lot of nuclear missile silos in a lot of the satellite countries that broke away. Matter of fact, they pay them good money every year to maintain control of those silos. So we're talking about nuclear weapons and silos spread across a huge landmass. And in order to assure, beyond doubt, that they couldn't totally destroy the United States in a retaliatory strike, we would have to take out enough of their missiles to make sure it wouldn't happen. And then the rest would be taken up by and knocked out of the sky by our anti-ballistic missile shield. Now let's talk about that for a second, okay? Because this is going to lead into what I wanted to talk about as far as arrogance goes. After the Cold War ended, only a small portion of the ABM shield had been erected. A vast majority of the work on the anti-ballistic missile shield was done after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Why? Why? Why would we do that? Why would we build an anti-ballistic missile shield after they became our buddies? After we started trading on a massive level? After thousands of U.S. corporations had moved into Russia? After. Gee, maybe you think they saw something might be coming? Okay. Stop and think about that. All right. Let's move on, because we'll get into that a little bit later, okay? All right. So every nuclear reactor would almost instantaneously melt down. Now, I discussed that, okay? But let's go into that just a little bit deeper. We're going to launch maybe 50 nukes to decapitate, or maybe 100 out of the thousands we have, to strike what we know to be their biggest concentration of missiles to strike back at us. So that what is left is within the realm of the ABM shield to take up. In other words, maybe the ABM shield only has the capability of knocking 20 to 30% of what we know the Russians or the Chinese have out of the sky before it hits us. So we would have to take out that 60 to 70% or 80% in a first strike. What we're going to do is create massive EMP pulses all across Asia and Europe. That's going to affect France, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, Russia today, Japan. Well, gee, where are the majority of the nuclear reactors on this planet? I told you there are 435 of them and 105 under construction right now. 104 of them are in the United States, and the next three largest countries, four largest countries containing nuclear reactors, are France, Japan, China, and Russia. So we just now launched this limited strike of which one of the byproducts I've already told you are massive EMP pulses. I just got done telling you that it's going to knock out the command and control. It's going to knock out the control facilities for these reactors. They're not even going to be able to use their diesel generators to run cooling water into these reactors because they all use solid state ignition. Your car is not going to run. Any automobiles within those EMP ranges are going to be totally knocked out. All of that's going to go away. You're immediately going to scram these reactors. Got to remember, I was on nuclear submarines. I worked around reactors most of my adult life. I can tell you, when you get a scram, that's basically a reactor at the point of going critical. You've dropped your control mechanisms. You've lost control of that reactor. So we get scrams across Russia, across China, maybe into the eastern part of France. A lot of missiles from the Soviet Union or Russia are located in western Russia. It's not a stretch to believe that a lot of those EMP pulses will hit Japan, which is right off the coast of Russia. So now we have a couple hundred nuclear reactors going into meltdown. What has happened because of one facility? First we had Chernobyl. Chernobyl put out more radiation than we got out of the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we knew what happened there. We saw it. Chernobyl put out more radiation over the long haul than those nuclear bombs, or those atomic bombs, which they were at the time, did. Fukushima's making Chernobyl look like a walk in the park. Fukushima's putting 300 tons of highly radioactive water into the ocean every day. We are seeing die-offs in the ocean that are absolutely mind-boggling. We are seeing cancer rate increases across the west coast of the United States as far as 500-600 miles inland, in Alaska, in Canada. We are seeing polar bears and penguins covered with open bleeding sores. Yeah, they just scratched too much. They got fleas, right? This is reality. This is one reactor facility. One. The type of radiation, the type of ionizing radiation released by these reactors doesn't go away in 40 to 50 years. It hangs around for 10,000 years or longer. Now imagine a couple hundred of them going critical. Because of this limited nuclear strike we were going to do. Gee, we just throw a couple. We'll scare them, so they'll back off from trying to destroy the petrodollar. You don't think that could happen? Again, let's go back to geoengineering. Actually, let's not. I think you got the point with that. So what we have here is not only the fallout from these 20, 30, 40 limited-sized nuclear warheads we dropped on Russia or China to decapitate them. We also have the fallout from all of these reactors, because once those reactor power rods lose their cooling, any water that's around them will become superheated very quickly. And what does superheated water turn into? Steam. Now they're in a confinement building. All right? They're in a domed building that is very strong. But I can tell you, all you got to do is look at Fukushima. All you got to do is look at Chernobyl to understand that when you superheat enough steam, the most powerful locomotives ever built on this planet were not diesel or electric locomotives. They were steam locomotives. Steam power is phenomenal. When steam expands, it carries more power with it than almost any other mechanism you can think of. So now we've got all of this water being superheated. These containment domes or buildings literally explode. And when they do, they spread radiation at an ultra-high rate of speed into the atmosphere, which gets carried for tens of thousands of miles. Again, let's look at Chernobyl. Let's look at Fukushima. So I don't think the biggest issue would be the limited nuclear strike on the military targets in Russia and China. I think the biggest issue would be all the nuclear reactors we scrammed or sent into a point of criticality. And actually, criticality is not a good word to use with reactors, because when a reactor is critical, it's operating efficiently. Most people don't understand that, but do a little research on it. Again, I've been around them just about all of my life. When a reactor is operating and putting out its full capacity of electricity, the reactor is called in a critical status. That's a good thing, actually. It's when it scrams and you no longer have control of the cooling mechanism, whether it's in the primary or the secondary loop. Because most reactors are cooled in two loops. The inner loop, which actually circulates the water around the rods, and the outer loop, because you can't really take that radioactive water that's touched those cooling rods and dump it anywhere. That's the big issue that's going on with Fukushima right now. They're dumping the cooling water right into the ocean, and it's highly radioactive. So you have two loops. The inner loop is a sealed loop. They constantly pump that water through, and it goes through a water jacket on the secondary loop. The secondary loop is like a radiator, okay? It's a bunch of coils that you circulate chilled water through that absorbs the heat from the primary cooling loop, and then you send that same water in the primary cooling loop back into the reactor to cool the rods. Once you breach that inner loop, that's where you get the explosion, the steam explosion. But that's not even the biggest problem, because there's only so many reactor rods in each reactor, power rods. The biggest amount of radioactivity is not within your reactor. The biggest amount of potentially catastrophic radioactivity sits in the many, many, many spent fuel rods that are stored in cooling pools in that facility. Maybe 10, 50, 30, 100 times as many rods as you've actually got in the reactor. Now, we call them spent rods because they no longer have enough energy within them to superheat the water to produce steam to turn the turbines. But I'm going to tell you right now, that don't mean they're safe. They're not. They're still extremely deadly to you and me. And if an explosion happens, a steam explosion, which pulverizes these rods and sends them into the air in the form of powder or dust, this is where your radioactive fallout comes from. This is what's killing us from these reactors. And it could be 100 times more radioactivity in those spent fuel rods than there is in the rods that are actually in the reactor. So we're talking about an effect that is hyper-catastrophic. Brand new word, never heard it before. Let's coin it now. Hyper-catastrophic. Because we're not talking about one reactor. We're talking about 19 or 20 reactors in China, about, I think, 30-something in Russia. We're talking about almost 50 of them in France, and another 50 of them in Japan. So we're talking at any given point, well over 100 of these 200 reactors going, I don't know. I don't want to say critical, because critical is a good thing with nuclear reactors, and most people, you need to get that into your head. If somebody's telling you the reactor is critical, don't run and hide. They're telling you that the reactor is doing what it's supposed to be doing. But if they say the reactor has scrammed, that's bad. That means they don't have control over it anymore. All right. So basically what we said was, once nuclear weapons are introduced into U.S.-Russian conflict, there would be a chance that a nuclear holocaust could not be avoided. Okay? Theories of a limited, here we go, limited nuclear war and nuclear de-escalation are unrealistic. In 2010, the Bush administration modified, listen up folks, modified the U.S. strategic doctrine from a retaliatory role to permit preemptive nuclear attack and counterforce doctrine used by both the U.S. and the Russian military. So the doctrine is no longer, if you launch at me, I will launch such a massive strike before your bombs hit that we will both be dead. It has moved from that doctrine to a doctrine of, we got cool enough weapons and we got cool enough anti-ballistic missile shield, and we can kill you and you can't kill us. That's the new doctrine. And that's the thing I'm trying to tell you that most Americans and most Russians are not aware of. That change came in 2010, less than 4 years ago. And you never heard a word about it. But it gets better. Okay? In 2010, again, the Bush administration modified U.S. strategic doctrine. Okay. This emphasizes the need for preemptive strike once a nuclear war begins. In other words, if you realize that you are in a situation that is untenable, that you cannot win, you do not wait for the enemy to launch the first nuke. You launch the first nuke. Let's take this one step further. If you realize that all of your control over the world's economic power is going down the toilet, and the Russians and the Chinese and the Indians are banding together to form a cabal that is absolutely going to destroy in totality the power of the petrodollar or the US dollar, because it's not how much you spend. You need to stop thinking that way. It's what you buy it with. Remember, every dollar you spend is a dollar of debt created. So it's not what you buy with it. It's what you buy it with. Every dollar that's created and goes into the U.S. economy means that we've got to pay back the Federal Reserve $1 plus interest. So it's not what we're going to buy, it's what we're going to buy it with. And if all of a sudden, which is a scenario which is right on the horizon, the petrodollar is going to be forced to collapse as the mechanism of control for the monetary system or the monetary power controlled by these elites across this planet, do you think that doesn't fit this scenario? You know it does. I just described what the scenario was to you. If you are in a position that you realize is untenable, this is U.S. military doctrine right now, people. This is not a guess. This is a fact. When the U.S. dollar collapses, the power of the United States goes to dirt. Quickly. Almost instantly. And the U.S. military doctrine is, if you are in an untenable position, you do not wait for the enemy to launch that first strike. You launch the first strike. Is there anybody out there with the mechanisms such as geoengineering and everything else I've explained that don't think that these idiots aren't stupid enough or crazy enough or insane enough to do just that? To launch what they believe is a limited enough strike to keep from killing more than, say, 30 or 40% of the world's population. Because they want at least 80% of us gone anyway. So if they realize they can get rid of the mechanism of destruction for the petrodollar or the US dollar, and at the same time take out 30, 40, 50% of the world's population, tell me you think they won't do it. I dare you to tell me that. Because if you believe that, you're an idiot. Okay. Emphasizes the need for preemptive strike. Strikes. It would be multiple. It would be plural. Once the nuclear war begins, both sides would be under immense pressure to launch a preemptive nuclear strike once military hostilities had commenced, especially if nuclear weapons had already been used on the battlefield. Something we haven't talked about. There are battlefield-sized nuclear weapons. Shells that have the ability to put out hundreds of tons, not kilotons, or maybe 1 kiloton blasts that could be used to wipe out an advancing force. Once you pop one of those, all hell's going to break loose all across this planet. Because once you've let the genie out of the bottle, you can't put it back in. All right. Yet top political leaders and policymakers in both the U.S. and Russia seem to be unaware that their launch-ready nuclear weapons represent a self-destruct mechanism for the human race. For example, in 2010, okay, the author says, I was able to publicly question the chief negotiator of the New START Treaty. The New START Treaty. Russian Ambassador Antonov, and then U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Gottenmeiler. During their joint briefing at the UN, during the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, I asked them if they were familiar with the recent peer-reviewed studies that predicted that the detonation of less than 1% of the explosive power contained in the operational and deployed U.S. and Russian nuclear forces would cause catastrophic changes in the global climate, that a nuclear war fought with their strategic nuclear weapons would kill most people on Earth, and they both answered no. What did I just say? These are the people we send to negotiate with our quote-unquote adversaries. We ask them if they know that only 1% of either arsenal would be enough to destroy a massive majority of humanity, and the people who are supposed to contain enough knowledge within their brains to negotiate treaties dealing with the most evil weapon ever developed by humanity state no. Is there anything more ludicrous or stupid or insane that you've ever heard? How the hell did they ever get this job? If you don't know the catastrophic destructive power of these mechanisms, why are you negotiating for me? Why are you there? You're the wrong person to be there. You're an idiot. More recently, on April 20th, 2014, I asked the same question and received the same answers from the U.S. officials sent to brief representatives of the NGOS at the Non-Proliferation Treaty Preparatory Committee meeting at the UN. None of the U.S. officials at the briefing were aware of these studies. None of them! And these studies have been going on for generations. Those present included top officials of the National Security Council. Explain this to me. Explain, why are these the people doing negotiating with our adversaries for you and me? They're idiots. Excuse me. It is frightening that President Obama and his administration appear unaware of the world's leading scientists have for years predicted that a nuclear war fought with the U.S. and or Russian strategic nuclear arsenal means the end of human history. Obviously, none of their top-level officials have got a clue. They do not know that the existential threat these arsenals pose to the human race. They don't know. Or do they choose to remain silent because this fact doesn't fit into their official narratives? They don't want us to know that they might pull some larky that's going to get rid of 50% of us. They don't want us to know that the people that they work for might be insane enough to set up a chain reaction that's absolutely going to annihilate a vast majority of this planet and everything alive on it. They don't want us to know. We hear only about terrorist threats that could destroy a city with an atomic bomb, while the threat of human extinction from nuclear war is never mentioned anymore. Even when the U.S. and Russia are each running huge nuclear war games in preparation for a U.S.-Russian war. And they are! And they are. When's the last time you heard this in the mainstream media? When's the last time we had a duck and cover drill in our schools? When's the last time you read an article about this in Time or Newsweek? They're the mainstream media, people. We are the true media. This is why we're the true media. This is why they're losing readership and they're losing viewership, because more and more people wake up every day and go, what aren't you telling me? And what they're not telling you is much more important than anything they are telling you, because most of what they are telling you is a freaking lie to keep you asleep and to keep you passive. Even more frightening is the fact that these neocons running the U.S. foreign policy believe that the U.S. has nuclear supremacy, or as they call it, nuclear primacy. This is their actual word, over Russia. That is, the U.S. could successfully launch a nuclear sneak attack against Russian and Chinese nuclear forces, completely destroying them. This theory was articulated in 2006, 8 years ago, in The Rise of U.S. Nuclear Primacy, which was published in Foreign Affairs by the Council on Foreign Relations. Oh my God, why doesn't that surprise me? All of this has links at the bottom of this article. Links to the actual publications. Everything I'm saying, I can prove by concluding that the Russians and Chinese would be unable to retaliate, or in some small part of their forces remained, would not risk a second attack by retaliating. This article invites nuclear war. It invites arrogance of those who control the military-industrial complex that is spread throughout France, Japan, the UK, the United States, South Africa, Australia. It's all one mechanism. And it invites the arrogance that we can actually do this. And they're not going to die. It's just most of us eaters, most of us cattle, that are going to die. But they're not taking into account the nuclear reactors. They're not taking into account absolutely shutting the biosphere down. They're not taking into account the actual type of radiation, not like a nuclear bomb, that these reactors will put out. They're not taking into effect it might be tens of thousands of years before they can come out of their holes, and they won't survive that length of time underground. There is a colonel in the Soviet Union who was charged, who was in charge of the security of the Soviet-Russian nuclear command and control systems for 7 years. He asked this gentleman to help him write a rebuttal, okay, against the policies of the U.S. who was on the Soviet General Staff and did war planning for the USSR, concluded that the primacy article used faulty methodology and erroneous assumptions, thus invalidating its conclusions. In other words, these people are all thinking some very, very seriously flawed thoughts. They weren't considering the nuclear reactors. They weren't considering destroying the entire ozone layer. They weren't considering a lot of issues. They were considering the initial destructive capabilities of these weapons, and they didn't go much beyond. This gentleman's contribution, the author of this article, lay in his knowledge of the recently published studies which predicted even a successful nuclear first strike, which destroyed 100% of the opposing side's nuclear weapons, would cause the citizens of the side that won the nuclear war to perish from nuclear famine just as the rest of humanity would. These are peer-reviewed studies. This is not a guess. I'm not guessing. I don't guess when I talk about things like this. Although the nuclear primacy article created quite a backlash in Russia, leading to a public speech by the Russian foreign minister, the story was essentially not covered in the U.S. press at all. We were unable to get our rebuttal published by the U.S. media. The question remains as to whether the U.S. nuclear primacy asserted in this article has been accepted as a fact by the U.S. political and military establishment. Has it been? Such acceptance would explain the recklessness of the U.S. policy towards Russia and China. Thus, we find ourselves in a situation in which those who are in charge of our nuclear arsenal seem not to understand that they can end human history if they choose to push the button. Most of the American public also remains completely unaware of the deadly threat. The uninformed are leading the uninformed towards the abyss of extinction. Now you know why we're doing this show. U.S. public schools have not taught students about nuclear weapons for more than 20 years now. The last time a nuclear war was discussed or debated in a U.S. Presidential election was sometime in the last century. Thus, most people do not know that a single strategic nuclear weapon can easily ignite a massive firestorm over 100 square miles, and that the U.S. and Russia each have many thousands of these weapons ready for immediate use. Meanwhile, neoconservative ideology has kept the U.S. at war during the entire 21st century. It has led to the expansion of U.S. NATO forces to the very borders of Russia, a huge mistake that has consequently revived the Cold War. We see this in a lot of new media articles today. A hallmark of neoconservatism is that America is the indispensable nation, as evidenced by the neoconservative belief in American exceptionalism. I hate that phrase. I hate it with a passion. What are we exceptional in? Our economy? It's in the toilet. Our productivity? It's in the toilet. Our healthcare system? It's in the toilet. Our educational system? It's in the toilet. Where the heck is our exceptionalism? Tell me. I dare you to tell me. Because you can't. But yet, this is the drum that's being beat. That essentially asserts that Americans are superior to all other peoples, that American interests and values should reign supreme in the world. Do you honestly believe that? Because that makes us dictators. At his West Point speech, as a matter of fact, on May 28th, President Obama said, "I believe in American exceptionalism with every fiber of my being." Obama stated his bottom line is that America must always lead on the world stage, and the backbone of that leadership will always be our military. Did you hear what I just said? It will always be our military. You do what I say, it will club you over the head and knock your butt to the ground. American exceptionalism based on might, not diplomacy, but based on hard power, not soft, is precisely the hubris and arrogance that could lead to the termination of human life. Washington's determination to prevent the rise of Russia and China has set us out, has set out in the Brzezinski and Wolfowitz documents. It's a receipt for nuclear warfare. There is a little bit more to this article. Anybody who has it, I strongly suggest you read it. Anybody who's listened to what I say, I strongly suggest you look at the list of extremely credible references and resources at the bottom of this article. I do. I want that credibility that the Liberty Beacon Project has to stay. I will say things with angst. I will say them with anger because these things piss me off beyond anything you can believe. But that should never, ever detract from the credibility of the message. If I'm hollering at you about something, you bet your sweet butt I've done the research. And I dare you to poke a hole in it. I dare you. Our credibility has been built over 63 weeks now, because this show is just about over. I won't put it at jeopardy. Paula, please step in, talk about your affiliates, give me any feedback on the show. Again, you're being way too quiet. You should have told me to shut up a couple of times and told me what you actually thought.
No, my dogs are really like...
oh, don't worry about it. We know what dogs sound
noisy.
like.
But, yes, we do go out over 1800.weebly.com. We also go... today... we had the big TV thing going on, and it kind of overshadowed that now we have Awake Radio Australia up and going, chat line player, everything there. Welcome, Awake Australia. And, oh my gosh, these changing times, radio, they have just bunch. It's just like we've all just piled together, and everybody's taken a bit, apart to do, and, it's, you can hear us, this show, everywhere, shaziz.com.
Well,
Tell
you know
me if
we
I left
love
somebody out. awakeradio.co.uk and awakeradio.us, of course. And the TV player is on awakeradio.us, and it's already on our Awake Australia site as well. And all of our affiliates will have it. And, of course, you can also see it at the Community Press Group Live.
Very, very nice. Well, you know what we think of Awake. We absolutely love the fact that you put up with this crazy old screaming fool every single week, and you keep asking me to come back. Of course, I don't think that makes you the most intelligent people in the world, but it does make you very, very good friends of ours. We love you to death.
Thank you so much. We love you, Roger.
All right, that's it, everybody. We'll talk again next week. Well, you'll get a chance to hear the old man scream one more time